San Jose passes a first-of-its-kind gun ownership tax, and an interview with ghost gun pioneer Cody Wilson. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski, also the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and buy a membership today if you want to support what we're doing, support our serious, sober approach to firearms reporting and analysis. So we are 100% reader funded, and we rely on your memberships to run this operation. Plus, you'll also get exclusive access to dozens of analysis pieces and original stories that you won't be able to get anywhere else. If you're not ready to buy immediately, you can also just sign up for the free newsletter that goes out every Friday. It gives you an update on all the latest breaking gun news stories throughout the country. And I think that you'll find it's very valuable. But today we have Cody Wilson from Defense Distributed on to talk about updates to the Ghost Gunner project, some of the legal cases that they're involved with, and specifically their 0% initiative, I guess you would call it. But Cody, can you just give the listeners who might not have heard of you before a little bit more background on yourself?
Yeah, hey, Stephen, thanks. I'm Cody Wilson. We've developed Defense Distributed, the company Defense Distributed. I guess you could say we're behind the first generation of 3D printed guns. The website DefCAD, and then our hardware project for 80% and more called Ghost Gunner, which is kind of well known as like the high end of the 80% space if you want to finish your 80% with machine tools. We've run Ghost Gunner for 6 or 7 years at this point. It's in its third generation, Ghost Gunner 3, and for SHOT Show this year, we demoed what we call 0% receivers because we anticipated that the ATF would maybe try to publish a rule banning 80% receivers this year, and we just wanted to show how ineffective that was before it was able to happen.
Yeah, and we should start there. Also, it sounds like you're a little sick. You're recovering, I believe, though, right?
You can really hear it, can't you?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, but
so yeah, I got COVID right after SHOT Show. I suppose lots of people did.
It's probably SHOT Show crud this year was probably COVID.
Just trying to live. You know, dude, I was really worried a couple nights ago because I've had fever like 3-4 nights in a row. And everybody I know who gets COVID is like, it's no big deal, just a sniffle. And of course, it just walloped me, man.
Yeah,
I had a hard time.
It seems random as to who gets it really. I mean, obviously, if you're older, usually people get it worse. But other than that, it seems kind of random how hard it hits somebody.
I'm with you, man. I must be spiritually old, right? I spent so many years fighting Democrats that now I'm, 70 years old in my spirit or something.
So. Well, we're glad that you're feeling better, at least when I get to come on the show, remotely.
Yeah, very, very remotely. We're quite distant.
Yes, we definitely have the required social distance between us. You're down in Austin, right, in Texas, and I'm up in Virginia, so no risk of transmission. I don't think
that we know of.
Yes, not that we're aware of yet, but I don't think there's a new variant that travels over the internet yet.
Careful.
But yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about that 0% project? Because I think that's been getting some headlines recently, right? As you're wont to do, you get a lot of headlines in the work that you do. And this new project is pretty fascinating to me. I stopped by your booth at SHOT Show to see it in action and see, the different components together. And it's really quite a fascinating response, I think, to what the ATF has proposed as a solution to the issue of 80% lowers or unfinished firearms receivers. The ATF, obviously, and the Biden administration specifically wants to expand the government's regulatory power in order to try and get at unfinished receivers. They call, obviously, the colloquial term is ghost gun because these tend to be once finished, they don't require a serial number. And that's been the case in the entire history of the country. But this is an issue in recent years that a lot of Democrats and gun control advocates are concerned about. They don't want anyone to own a gun that doesn't have a serial number on it so that the ATF can trace it if it shows up in a crime. This is the basic debate going on. But they put out a rulemaking document that if taken to its limits, could certainly have basically they want to say that anything that has a certain number of components in it, the fire control group area, the magazine, well, and a number of other things could be considered a firearm receiver, which would then have to be regulated by the licensing process under the Gun Control Act, which entails putting a serial number on it, getting a license to sell, to manufacture and sell it to the public. And they also want to extend this power to anything that could be, quote, readily converted to a finished receiver. And so they don't give many hard guidelines as to what readily converted to means in their definition. But one of the cases that they had pointed to involved 8 hours in a fully stocked machine shop, which, when you're talking about, especially an AR-15 lower, I have an AR-15 lower here for those on YouTube and want to see what one looks like. This is the regulated part. It's called a strip lower in the community. And you could go from a block of metal to one of these probably in 8 hours if you know what you're doing. And so this is one of the problems with the proposed rule, is that it gives an extremely expansive view of the law, which allows the ATF to have quite a lot of power in determining what they want to regulate. But in that regulation, as you pointed out to me at SHOT Show, they do have a paragraph where they describe how they would not try to regulate just bar stock of metal. And I guess that's where the idea that you guys came up with sprung from, right? Is that a good summation of how this happened?
I think so. If you don't mind me venturing my own restatement, because this is it's so tedious and there's so many pages and there's so many ways they approach it that it is it overwhelms you. They baffle you with bullshit. It's meant to put you to sleep and then just intimidate you into thinking, well, the ATF can do whatever they want, which is exactly what they want. But in all this new 100 pages of stuff they throw at you to expand the definition of a firearm, we know, because they say that they don't intend to regulate molds and raw pieces of material, right. Unformed, stock, raw pieces of material. And like I told you at SHOT Show, well then, they screwed up, because we'll just go from a raw piece of material and we'll go right back into 100% on our piece of equipment. And we don't have to worry about all these other tests for readily convertible or, readily identifiable. Like they define all these other tests. There's this 8-part scenario they create. It's like we can forget about all of it, because at least in the last draft of the rule that I saw, which will probably be changed now that we've demoed 0% this way.
That could be.
They go out of their way to say, well, of course we wouldn't regulate raw blocks of metal. So now 0%, I think, should be, as a commercial concept, should be considered by us and others as any concept that wants to go from a raw piece of metal that's not formed in any way to become a receiver into a receiver. And that's the type of software that we'll begin shipping on and supporting on the Ghost Gunner. Yeah,
and that's interesting to me, right? Because one thing I had pointed out to you, and interested on your thoughts a little more on this, that section in the proposed rule, it's kind of an aside. It's like a promise. They want all this regulatory authority, and then they promise we don't want to go after raw materials.
Right.
So, it seems to me, obviously, that's something that could just be removed at any point. But even, but practically speaking, it's probably impossible for them. It's literally impossible for them to try and regulate all aluminum bar stock, because you're the key component for this 0% idea that you guys are putting out now. This code for your machine. So I should briefly explain what the Ghost Gunner is. It's a CNC machine, right? It's a mill. It's a compact CNC machine that people can use. You could use it for anything you could use a CNC machine for, right? But obviously, you guys make software that helps finish firearms parts in the CNC machine. But yeah, so you can take what is effectively a stock piece of aluminum that you could buy at any store that sells, aluminum, to a person, and then you can take that and make the necessary cuts in it to create the key component of a lower receiver. I mean, I guess this is something that people might not understand if they haven't seen it.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it if you want.
Yeah, because it's not like the one I just showed is a full finished stripped lower all in one piece. Your design is a little bit different than that, right?
Yeah, we made, so in our first commercial 0% package, we took an AR low receiver and split it, you could say, into 3 parts. And this is just to save material and to help you make it from small stock sizes where you're not wasting a lot of time and material yourself.
Right.
And that keeps the concept commercial. But the idea is once you make the components or buy some of the others, you bolt it back together. Kind of like the Frankenlower in the early, like the Frankenstoner, I think it was called, in the early 80% days. There's been ideas like this before, but we were basically trying to demo at SHOT Show the tightest, most commercial package that we had, where you only, let's say, have to put about 8 hours of time into the machine, and then everything else, it doesn't matter because ATF doesn't regulate it. You can just add on those parts, buy them, and you can make them, or you can even 3D print one of them. And we're just trying to show this combination of techniques that gets around the rule. Mm-hmm. But I can also point out that we had some fixtures at our booth from one of our developers who truly is supporting just a giant block of metal in multiple degrees of freedom, where you can cut on that thing for 16 hours and you'll get the entire lower receiver, just like the one that you showed. So there's lots of ways to get there. The concept we're trying to show is no matter what, you can start with a raw piece of material. But we think our concept is a bit more insidious and difficult to regulate because every component will come from is a stock extrusion size, which you don't have to get from us, you can get from anyone. And our gambit is ATF will never tell Home Depot or Metals for You or whoever it is, to regulate these bar stock components.
Yeah, I mean, it's just thinking through it, it's essentially impossible. I mean, the one thing I thought is like, okay, well, what they could do is just remove that language and then say, all right, we will regulate raw stock material if it's being sold alongside a kit of some sort. That's kind of what they're doing. That's what their proposal is for like Polymer 80. That's why they rated Polymer 80 a while back, is because they believe that this concept of selling the 80%, the unfinished lower alongside a kit to finish the lower violates, their interpretation of the law. And so that's one of the things they're going to go. So they could just remove that language and say, well, if you're selling this alongside of a Ghost Gunner with the code necessary to finish, receiver and the other 2 parts that you need to finish the frame, well, all right, then that needs to be serialized, and you need a manufacturer's license, and you need a FFL you need everybody to go through background checks to buy this. Okay. But then the solution seems fairly simple too, which is on your guys' end. It's just to stop selling the bar stock and then tell people they can go buy it themselves at any store that sells it. Because how could they?
There's multiple potential solutions in our package, which I think have yet to be kind of demonstrated yet, because we don't know what path ATF ultimately will take. But let's say ATF says, well, receiver kits themselves, no matter what the combination, if it's a raw piece of material, but you sell that piece of material with a piece of software or whatever, okay, we consider that regulated, fine. We won't sell the raw piece of material. Right. But if I sell you 2 other components that can be bolted onto that finished piece of material, those 2 components by themselves, by the ATF's definition, cannot be considered readily convertible. Those 2, like the buffer tower component and the little skirt that I showed you, those 2 put together will never be considered, readily convertible, nearly identifiable, any of the definitions they created. So we're showing how you can kind of remix, even with the new situation, to where there's still a commercial side where you can sell parts of it, even if you can't sell a buy, build, shoot kit like Polymer 80 has. I still think there's lots of ways to route around this. Yeah. And so also we've given ourselves room, because ATF, if they haven't finished the rule yet, right, and they do want to change it based on what we've done, we've still withheld a final configuration. So if they change the rule and say, like, well, actually, you can't do this, you can do that, we still have a couple tricks up our sleeve, because I can help you make every single part of that lower. I don't have to sell you any of the raw material, and all of it can be from raw material. I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, but what I'm saying is they've also written themselves into a corner. Yes, they've said in their rule, like, well, obviously with raw material, without more, we don't regulate it. Okay, they could change that, but they've still, with all the tests they've created, they've still made it almost impossible by focusing on kit guns and readily convertible components. Everything that we're going to sell you can't be by itself considered readily convertible, at least off the bat. And in combination, we won't allow the ATF to consider it a receiver kit. We'll sell it in some combination that doesn't get you there. And, I think we'll set the standard. I mean, in an hour, I'm talking to another 80% company who wants to follow on our concept and develop 0% concepts for the machine. Everybody gets it now. Like, they're going to at least make a play here, because if anything else, it dissuades ATF from going in this new direction. And at least we can allow them to pretend that they fixed one problem while it opens up a lane in a totally different avenue.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, it's hard to see how they could possibly regulate this, especially under the proposed rule that they've got, because the way it works is essentially, if you're selling something that's intended to become a firearm, then you have to serialize it and you have to get the required licensing to sell, to make and sell it. But I don't know how you get around, sure, you go after the kits, right? Oh, okay, well, if you're selling it in a kit, then clearly even this bar stock is intended to become a receiver. But then, all right, well, just don't sell the bar stock metal. And that gets around it. So, they're not going to go into every Home Depot or whoever, wherever else you can buy raw metal and try to tell them to serialize every bar stock and keep the kinds of records that you need and get the federal licensings that you need to sell firearms. That's obviously not realistic.
We could say that we know that they want to do that in some hypothetical sense. Like, surely ATF would like to regulate everything. But actually what's happening is, okay, like, we know Mom's Demand and everyone, doesn't want you to be able to make a firearm. Mm-hmm. But ATF doesn't actually have the power to affect that. So the most they could accomplish with this rule is expanding the definition of a firearm to as many things as possible. And so if we think about it in that way, ATF knows that it can never consider a raw block of metal a firearm. And it knows that it's going to get challenged, especially in favorable federal jurisdictions. If it starts to tell me, or people close to me, that the raw pieces of material we're selling are actually firearms, it's going to get laughed at and thrown out in court. They kind of know they can't even go near it. And so they have to write things in the rule just to show, like, well, look, we're being reasonable, of course, so that they can be unreasonable kind of further down the chain about other components of a more finished variety. Yeah,
I mean, when I read through that proposal, what I see from the ATF is a desire to continue to do the things that they are already doing, but without facing too much scrutiny in court. So what this means in practice is, like, they want to go after kits. So they're trying to expand the definition to make it easier for them to go after kits. And they want to go after felons in possession of AR-15 stripped lowers, because they had a problem with this in court in recent years, because their definition of a receiver doesn't match what the AR-15 lower is, because it doesn't have all the components necessary. It doesn't have the breech. It doesn't, there's a number of things that in the federal registry for what defines a receiver or a frame that isn't included in that part. But for 60 years, they've just defaulted to, well, it's okay. We're just going to regulate this one piece because we got to pick a piece. And so now they want to expand the definition to theoretically let them pick. I mean, theoretically, under the new definition, they could pick multiple pieces from an AR or a lot of different kinds of guns and declare them receivers. But they basically, you read through it and it's clear that they just don't like what these judges have been doing. And they're like, fine, we're just going to expand the definition to be so we can make it whatever we want. And then we're just going to use it the same way we've been using. That's when I read through it, that's how I read it. But it's interesting. I
agree 100%.
Yeah. And it's just interesting to see the ways that you've gotten into territory now that I think, and obviously I would imagine this was really your stated goal all along, to where there's no real regulatory solution to what you're doing to try and ban what you're trying to accomplish. Like, what is the solution here? You ban CNC machines, or you ban metal stock, you ban sharing. I mean, that's kind of where you have to get into these. Like, it's not real. Even if you try to ban these things, it wouldn't stop.
We know what they want. They want an act of Congress that says no one can build a gun. I mean, that's what they want. Now, will they get it? Maybe, by defining everything as ghost guns and stuff. And we've seen, perhaps you intend to get into this, like Maryland's latest bill. And, there's these state and municipal ordinances I'm seeing that say, well, we ban ghost guns. But what this actually means is we ban your ability to either buy components to make a firearm, or we ban online sellers' ability to sell you components to make a firearm. And that's, that's troubling. And I think it relies on asceticism, which is true, that the Supreme Court won't intervene. So, this country is still splitting along these lines where some people are going to easily be able to make guns, have guns, and some people won't.
I just think, I do want to get into that. I think that's a good transition into some of these state laws and some of these legal fights that you're going through over this exact issue. But, first, I just think that the philosophical point, which is something you've been heavily leaning on your entire career, right? Since you first designed the Liberator, which was the 3D printed firearm, years ago, and got a lot of attention over that. There's kind of this philosophical approach to the whole operation of, look, you can make all the laws you want, but with technology where it's at now and the ease of sharing this information, you can't. It's really impossible to stop the signal. This is sort of the FPC meme, which comes from obviously Firefly, but yeah, once the information is out there, once the knowledge is out there, it's not really possible to stop this. And now the barrier to entry for making your own firearm has become, with these latest developments, so low that you're really asking this philosophical question about how could you ever try and regulate these things fully ever again?
This is a fair point. So I'd like to follow on. I mean, our technology, or let's say our company, comes around the same time that WikiLeaks came of age, and really Bitcoin came to public consciousness. So like 3D guns, Bitcoin, WikiLeaks, these all they arrive at the same moment. Even that moment of like Edward Snowden, where we realize the internet doesn't actually allow perfect 20th century regulation of the things we care about anymore. and it's not like people couldn't make guns before. I see this all the time. For many years, people are like, well, so what? I can always make a gun. Yes, that's always been true. But this, the scariest part of 3D guns, I think, and then maybe some of the rest of the philosophy of our projects is that there's this downloadable component to what we're talking about. So like there are files for a gun that you can download, and you realize to some degree you can basically go into programmable machine tools. You got them directly from the internet. There's no place to insert a regulatory authority. And so it becomes kind of laughable to consider a police of this process. And that's what WikiLeaks and Bitcoin are about. Like they're perfect because there's nobody in between, and the information is liquid, instantaneous. And then the more you try to push it around and regulate it, suppress it, the more it spreads itself all over the internet. So these things are related in this way. And that's right. That's our philosophy. And that's where our company came from, this kind of digital libertarian place. And we take platform technologies and attempt to demonstrate basically over and over again that the internet allows, for our vision of the future, far more than any alternative.
And we'll get into some of the drawbacks or critiques of this in a little bit. But first, I want to start with what you were alluding to earlier here, which is some people do still try to regulate these things. It hasn't stopped people from even while you can make this philosophical argument that it's kind of pointless, or at least futile, perhaps in the end. There are attempts right now across the country to try and restrict exactly these technologies, and they go about it in a number of different ways. And so I was hoping, you could give a little update on the latest in some of the federal lawsuits and then some of the state laws. Like perhaps we could start with New Jersey. What they've tried to do seems to be one of the most extreme examples that involves really kind of trying to shut down the information sharing side of this process. Can you talk a little bit about that and where the legal case is with New Jersey?
I'll say that the origins of the state law attempts to police the information comes from the failure of the federal attempts to police. So for the first 5 years of 3D guns, we were being attacked by the U.S. State Department, and to some degree the Commerce Department, but that police action failed and ultimately was settled in court. And I think this somehow, this happened during the Trump administration, and it just shocked the conscience of the progressive, attorneys general across the country and all the liberals. And so they demanded that their state attorneys do something. And so New Jersey, Phil Murphy, they passed the first of its kind state law where they're like, well, fine, if anyone in our state can access such a website or download such a file, it's a felon for the provider of the file. You see, so if anybody on a cell phone in New York, but is a resident of New Jersey, accesses devcat.com and downloads a file for a 3D gun or a magazine, actually a felony for Cody Wilson to have provided that and not screened that out. And this, I think, is one of the first of these kind of fragmentary laws that we're beginning to see these states participate in for tit for tat. Like now we've seen Texas' weird abortion law, for example, which allows people to sue providers, and then same thing in California. Gavin Newsom promises, look, in my session this year, I'm going to allow private residents in California to sue any ghost gun company in the country. Like, so we're splitting up into this fractal territory where states are just going to basically create whatever kind of federal police power they want, but they'll have a sophisticated way of avoiding, let's say, judicial scrutiny of it, and then just allow people to tear themselves up in private lawsuits over it. So New Jersey's is kind of the first of that kind where they say, well, anything, if you allow me to download it, if you allow me to see it, if you email me about it, whatever, that's a felony. And that's so intense and extreme. But their cynicism is, well, it's going to take you about 5 or 6 years to probably sort that out in our courts. So it's worth it. And true enough, right? I've been suing on that law since 2018. I finally got jurisdiction over the Attorney General of New Jersey in Texas. I had to go to the Fifth Circuit to get it. And I've been waiting at the Fifth Circuit again for another 6 months on whether or not it's illegal. Finally, at last, And I'm going to die of COVID before I find out.
Hopefully not.
But it's just things like this all the time. And, we're always looking at California, trying to innovate, or create some version of it. But Washington State has a very similar law to New Jersey's, although it's more ambiguous. It's kind of more modest. It's a little more afraid of itself. I've seen similar laws in New Mexico. And now individual cities like, San Jose's in the news now for their tax thing, their liability thing. But San Diego has made it illegal for you to basically have files or kits. Same thing with San Francisco, no kits. So each little municipality starts ticking things off or joining in lawsuits against Palmer 80, things like this. So it's broken down at this micro level where there's just a ton of private party lawsuits, and then you're hoping, okay, the Ninth Circuit's not going to help me out, but maybe the Fifth Circuit will, maybe the Third Circuit will, if you see what I'm saying. Yeah,
and it's interesting too because it implicates obviously much more than just Second Amendment rights. There's also First Amendment rights are very much implicated in these attempts to block the sharing of files. I mean, look, I've got, this is the patent drawing for the 1911. This is a 100-year-old gun. It's very popular, famous. There's also one right here in the physical real world. But this is essentially the same thing as a CAD file. It gives you all the specifications for what the measurements are for the gun and how to build one. And in sharing this, even here on this platform on YouTube, potentially maybe a violation of that New Jersey law. And publishing these for public consumption in New Jersey, even though they're focused on the CAD file, there's really no practical difference. And so the CAD file is just a digital representation of the information that's in this.
I think, there's at least an awareness on the lawmakers' part that there's something about a digital model itself in 3 dimensions, which is somehow more terrifying than the 2D model. But they don't write the laws that way, right? Mm-hmm. So they, just like the ATF rule, they want to give themselves actually a maximum of police power and see if people like me and SAF and FPC can kind of whittle it down to the core of, 3D CAD or 3D CAM, however they want to define these things. And this is actually the heart of the latest federal problem that we have too, where, okay, after we beat the State Department, and maybe this doesn't matter so much, but there's now this dispute about what is a CAD file versus what is a CAM file, and what is regulated and does that matter?
I haven't seen quite as much uproar about this through the media. I think maybe people don't really even understand how broad these laws actually are and how much is implicated beyond just gun rights, which, obviously many media outlets are not favorable towards gun rights and might be more willing to accept restrictions that they wouldn't be willing to accept on First Amendment rights. I mean, for instance, we had a magazine that published the designs for the nuclear bomb, and that was, deemed to be legal by the Supreme Court. But now I can't publish the 100-year-old design of the 1911, one of the most prolific firearms in history.
Yeah. There's a secondary irony here, which is that most of the blueprints for all the guns we care about are held in the public trust, not just in the patent office, but the Army Publishing Directorate. I mean, these are all public documents.
Right.
The number one offender in this scenario is actually still the U.S. government, because these are all public public documents and blueprints.
Yeah, it is.
Springfield and everything else. So it's like, okay, well, what do you want from me? It's like, I didn't invent the gun. Didn't the U.S. government invent the gun? But I'm with you, man. And no, it's not meant to make sense, right? It's meant to be, to some degree, you can say it's cynicism. It's these AGs just knowing they can kind of, ghost guns like aren't a real issue, and so it's easy to score points on this and kind of dunk on me and internet anarchists and be like, oh, we're protecting you against the scary ghost gun people. But then the other thing is this actual Chinese intent to somehow kind of prevent a future where people can easily have the means of making guns for themselves, and that's a scary future to consider.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, obviously, I think one of the major pushbacks to this concept of that technology is going to lead to greater human freedom is China, right? You can look at how they've been able to restrict access to information even in the digital age, and you could, in a sort of dystopian future, you could certainly see that applied to exactly what you're trying to do as well. Not fully and not completely, but it's not going to be as free as perhaps maybe we would. The idealist might imagine it to be.
It feels fully and complete to me, in fact. I don't think this is a cheap point to make, but we've actually encountered through our moments of victory and moments of defeat, we've encountered the full weight of the US style of suppression of the internet, which isn't just, police powers of the state and little states, but Facebook, Google, you understand, Instagram, all this stuff. And it's not like we're the only ones now. All the people in our space get bullied, pushed around, and kind of quietly taken out of the conversation. And I look at my booth in SHOT Show, a guy came by, I won't say his name, and he's like, hey, I was literally the guy at Facebook that black holed your companies when news of your victory came out. And when he says black hole, he means like there's an actual tool at Facebook called Black Hole. And so like if anyone mentions 3D guns or DefCAD links or even, defense distributed or something, that doesn't go anywhere. That gets absorbed into this system and completely suppressed and cannot spread. The links are filtered in real time. This isn't a surprise to people anymore. But remember, it was only 2018 when this stuff just got deployed for the first time. So we are pretending, if we don't think we have almost a simultaneously evil system like China's, we just get the additional propaganda of pretending that we're the free people of the West.
I mean, I don't know that I fully would go that far, but I will say that there is a legitimate point there in terms of how the internet operates in America, even in free countries. It is largely controlled by sort of mega corporations. Amazon hosts most of the websites on the internet. Facebook controls huge swaths of digital communication, whether on Facebook or through WhatsApp or what have you. There's a number of ways. And so there are mega corporations that do have a lot of pull over who gets to say what. It's not to the same degree as in China, but it's certainly something that people should consider and think about, because you're right. If you tried to they didn't just deplatform entities. Like it's not just not going to let you have a Facebook group or a Facebook page. They can and do, in this case, block all mention of what you're doing. You can't even talk about it on Facebook, which is remarkable. It's not, and it's something that I think a lot of people haven't caught up with that happens, because you like to assume that a lot of these platforms would, maybe they don't want people spread it. There's plenty of controversy about deplatforming and whether it's necessary in this situation or another or whatever, if it's beneficial or harmful. But this is further than that. Yeah.
To be as fair as possible, COVID, I think, woke a lot of people up to this, in a way that no one had been awake to it before. So, okay, people get now that like you can be completely thrown out of the public conversation, when these COVID doctors come out and they'll say X or Y, and suddenly only Joe Rogan will have them on. And, misinformation is now the word by which the Western system can just expel you from the commons. So people see that this is happening in a way that maybe they didn't a couple of years ago. And I don't want to say we're completely blind to it. And to your point, yes, the degree is not like it is in China, but we have a competitive and similar system to China's, which at least in China's case is pure force. And like, we don't have to like pretend that it's anything other than it is. In the States, we have to kind of, okay, someone's going to get canceled. Someone's going to get me too. There's always some fake reason for why we have to throw someone out of the conversation. So Anyway.
Well, and there's a difference between government force and private actors. But like I said earlier, the fact that some of these companies are extremely large and do control huge portions of the online space is a fair point to make about, in a discussion over deplatforming and how these companies operate and what ideas they allow to be on their platforms and how much of an impact that has on free speech as a whole when they're removed, whether they're, spewing lies about the vaccines or whatever they're doing. There is a larger debate here about how to handle that and what's the best, macro approach to it. But
more than we can handle, I'm sure.
Certainly not. We're going to get to the bottom of it in this podcast, but but like I said, even as somebody who is skeptical of a lot of claims of censorship and so forth, there is something here that I think a lot of people don't even realize the scope of it, and it's an important conversation to have for sure. The other, I mentioned earlier we can get back to critiques and drawbacks of this approach and what you're doing, and obviously the main reason that you get a lot of these laws that attempt to restrict, ghost guns, right, or being able to manufacture your own firearms, even though this is something, as you alluded to earlier, has been perfectly legal to do in the United States since before the United States even existed. But the concern is obviously over the criminal use of firearms, over criminals building their own guns, and obviously bringing down the barrier of entry to building a gun. That doesn't bring it down just for the nice law-abiding people. It brings it down for everyone, and that's the nature of technological advancement. So you see this resistance is in large part justified by the concern over criminals being able to build their own guns that are untraceable and difficult to counter for law enforcement, right? This is the argument that you get. And obviously, with your own criminal history and the plea that you agreed to several years ago, which is injury of a child, the situation with the Sugar Daddy website, people know this has been well documented. But the question is, given that history, right, and given the reason that people are skeptical of this technology being, they probably fear somebody like you getting firearms, even though you're not prohibited. To make this clear, right, you are not prohibited from owning firearms.
Right. That's probably the first thing I'd say. Right. But go ahead.
But certainly, I'm sure you understand the general nature of the concern that most people have, even just a normal person who looks at the situation and says, "Oh, I'm worried about criminals using this," and then you having a criminal history, being the face of this development. How do you alleviate those concerns for people? Like, how do you respond to that?
Well, this isn't going to be like a pro-social answer. I mean, I don't think it's my job to alleviate the concerns. If anything, it's always been our approach to accelerate the concerns. And I know this doesn't sound like, you're not being a friend of the industry, Cody, but the industry itself wasn't protecting itself until it was completely under attack. So years of me trying to convince Polymer 80 to sue and push back didn't do anything until Polymer 80 got sued. So I guess I would say it's not safe to be able to make a gun. And it's not the safe kind of people who develop these technologies. I'm a radical kind of guy. The living that I've done is somewhat fast, and I don't think that I'm the best guy to take home to meet your mom. But I don't think American history is full of those people. I mean, I just finished Samuel Colt's biography last year. He was selling hits of nitrous oxide under circus tents and letting people beat the crap out of each other, to fund the development of his revolver. I mean, this is a weird country. It's hard on people. I'm a weird guy. And, it's these kind of strange people that create technical innovations. And, I don't want to be a completely toxic personality that brings down our industry. But it's pretty tough to live in this country in time without taking some major flack from these school moms and these lawyers. And, dude, I'm trying to, live as clean but as fast as I can.
Sure. And look, I understand, obviously, you weren't intending to get yourself into the situation that led to the criminal charges. But do you think that why do you think that you're still the best face for this movement, given that history?
Well, I'm not saying that I'm the best face for it. In fact, I don't think I've ever been the best face for it. I think I found this zone kind of first and earliest, and I'm still probably better spoken than most of the other people in our little space. But it's just a measure of work and talent to some degree. And again, I'm not trying to praise myself. I'm just saying I don't think I'm the best. I don't think I'm a moral leader. I'm not a moral philosopher. I'm out here doing what can be done and trying to beat the ATF and Moms Demand and all these other people to the punch, because to me, it's a great contest. Like in the way our founders would say, it's an animating contest of liberty. I enjoy it. I'm here for myself. I'm not here to be a representative for other people.
Right. Yeah. I just mean, when this first happened, you stepped away from the company and someone else was leading it publicly. What was it that made you decide to come back and be the driving force behind the company, out and in front, in public, doing interviews like this one, right? Where you're going to get questions like this. Why did you, people know you, people know that you are very articulate, and that you have a lot of the ideas that go into what Defense Distribute produces. But what was the thing that made you decide?
Well, number one, the companies are an extension of my personal, persona or my beliefs. But number two, I guess I'll say it this way. I don't know. There's a couple ways to say it. It's dangerous to be the head of this company. Okay, I mean, our authorities don't mess around anymore. You can do things that are 10% as dangerous as what I'm doing legally and go away for a long time. And so it's not fair. It's not just to ask someone else to run and head my companies, knowing the personal risk all the time. I mean, I'm in California. I'm being personally sued along with Ghost Gunner for $500 million. Anytime we get in trouble with the feds or New Jersey, they want to pierce the corporate fiction. They want to throw me in jail. Even before I got into my recent round of trouble, just with the dating thing, I was facing contempt of court in Newark, New Jersey. I mean, they constantly want to put me in jail. And I just don't think that's fair to ask anybody else to do if I've got the skin in the game. So I guess the answer is like a Talebian, if you want to do it, if you want to talk the talk, you have to put the skin in the game. And that's the only way that I would do it.
Interesting. And so looking forward here for Defense Distributed and for you, what's the next step? You've developed this 0% program now. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, I think we see if 0% concepts are truly commercial. We're kind of in this liminal space where it's a transition space. We don't know if 80s are going to be canceled or not, so and therefore we don't really know if 0% have their own commercial appeal outside of that monopoly condition where you can't do 80%. So it's about proving that out. It's about helping people come onto the machine and making the most commercial experience possible on the machine. And to some degree, that's always been the program. And then, core Defense Distributed is developing DefCAD and developing whatever the most legal way of downloading the files for 3D guns or CNC guns can be, because there's still lots of ways to do it online. And this is good. And this is proof that we win. Like, it almost doesn't matter how many laws there are. We've done all this talk about laws on this podcast, right? But this is almost academic, because most of the kids out there and the people who actually encounter this stuff on the internet, they don't even know that it's illegal the way that they encounter it. It's just there. And this is proof, you could say, that we win anyway. But still, I think it's necessary to maintain legal channels which allow you to get the files, allow you to get the stuff, and that don't encourage police suppression. And that's a full-time job, and that's what I intend to keep doing.
Yeah, great. And for people who want to support what you're doing, or they want to pick up a Ghost Gunner, for instance, what's the best way for them to do that?
Defense Distributed is a company. Ghost Gunner is the product for milling your own 80%, 0%, ghostgunner.net, defcad.com if you want to download files. It's all out there. It's all connected. We just, check us out. Google us.
Hey, all right. Well, we appreciate you coming on, answering some of our questions, including some of the harder ones, right? I appreciate you doing that. So
always a good time, man.
Yeah, and we'll have to have you back on again soon in the future, too.
All right, my pleasure, brother. Thank you.
Okay, now it's time for the news update with contributing writer Jake Fogelman. How you doing, Jake? How's your day going?
I'm doing all right, Stephen. Happy to be here.
Good. We're happy to have you again. I think you're fully recovered, right? From you were a little sick for a while, but now you're fully back 100%, right?
Yep, all good on my end.
Good. And you actually have, well, two stories. We're going to talk about them simultaneously, but you got two stories this week about San Jose, California, right? They did something that was first of its kind, right?
That's correct. So the city council officially voted to approve the, as you said, unprecedented ordinances that will require all gun owners in the city to get mandatory liability insurance, in addition to paying an annual fee, which they're saying is going to be around $25. But yeah, so they've officially gone ahead and approved this. It's been a long time in the making. I think we reported on this last year sometime around the summertime. Yeah. But yeah, so after a lengthy public input period, there was a lot of online comments filed, largely negative. They still went ahead and voted it up.
Yeah, they and it was sort of a marathon meeting that they had, but because we both stayed up to watch it at East Coast time, and they didn't finish till like 1 a.m. East Coast time to do the vote. They did a bunch of stuff. They talked for a long time, and then they ended up splitting the ordinance into two different ordinances, which I guess there were two council members who voted against the fee, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so it was 10-1 for the insurance mandate and 8-3 for they call it a fee, although I think most people would call it a tax because it's just, they're just charging you for owning a gun. It's not a sales tax. It's not a fee for service. It's just a tax on your property. And this applies, to be clear, to anyone who owns a gun at all in San Jose, right?
That's correct. And because we know California has a gun registry, that means they are well aware if you have a gun or not. They said they'll be in contact with the California Department of Justice because that's the only agency that keeps track of that registry. But they'll be using that database to send notices out to individual households that they have on record that own guns, basically informing them of their obligation now to get insurance and to pay that annual fee.
Yeah. And so what are they proposing to use this fee for?
So I guess there's a nonprofit organization that's not yet fully formed. It's still in the works, with various public health experts and community leaders, that all the money is going to go. Real
quick, though, that's kind of the story of this whole ordinance, right? Really, none of this is fully formed yet. There's no insurance policy that meets the requirements, right? Either.
That's right. We, as you said, when we watched the hearings about this, there's all sorts of questions from various council members that heard different things from different insurance companies that they talked to. So it's pretty clear that this isn't fully hashed out yet. I think they have a meeting in February where they're going to hopefully have more details about this.
And it technically hasn't gone into effect yet either, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it's only been approved by the council, but it's not yet law. So after that final meeting in February, there'll be 180 days after that meeting when that law finally goes into effect. So this will be, I think August is when they're shooting for to have this become good law.
Next August, or no, this August. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. But and so they want to use the fee to create a nonprofit that's going to, I guess, provide training for gun safety and then provide services for people who've been shot, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of like mental health services for people affected by gun violence. As you said,
even
gun
if
safety
you haven't
training.
Been shot, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Essentially, that's also not fully worked out. We saw some trepidation from some members. I guess in the ordinance provision, it says these services will only apply to people with guns, which is a little strange that you're getting taxed, but then they're applying the services to you when the entire rationale was that this was going to somehow pay the city back for the costs of gun violence.
Right.
So it's not yet clear, the rationale.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the mayor who's the driving force behind this. His name's Sam Liccardo. He's a Democrat. I think everyone on the council is a Democrat too, right?
I believe. I'm not sure if they have partisan affiliation on the actual council members.
They might not, you're right. But the mayor is certainly a Democrat, and he's been the one pushing this. And his comments kind of make it pretty obvious that this is sort of intentionally punitive against gun owners. Here's a quote from him from your story. While the Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms, it does not require taxpayers to subsidize gun ownership. We won't magically end gun violence, but we will stop paying for it. We can also better care for its victims and reduce gun-related injuries and death through sensible intervention. So, I mean, on his explicit justification itself, I mean, it's sort of a punitive thing. They're saying that gun owners, gun ownership is a drag on society because of gun violence, and so we're going to charge people who own guns these fees and require them to get insurance in order to, make up for the harm caused. Right? That's the basic logic here.
That is the rationale, and I think the mayor would have a point if this was somehow going to be attached to criminal use of firearms. But as was uncovered in the text of the ordinance, and as well as the public comment and the deliberations on the council members, that insurance companies will not, in fact, insure criminal behavior.
Right.
It will only apply to accidental use of firearms. Which makes up, as we know statistically, makes up a very small amount of gun harm.
Certainly. And even in that case, a lot of accidental shootings are the result of negligence on the part of the owner of the gun, or at least the person handling the gun. And so I think it's unclear how willing insurance companies are going to be to insure against somebody who's grossly negligent in handling their firearms to the point where they're accidentally shooting themselves or someone else.
That's right.
So, that's likely why you don't see that sort of insurance on the market today already. Also probably because these are really fairly rare incidents. Accidental shootings they're not
That's right.
super common. It's not like car accidents. Car accidents are far more common than gun accidents. It's an interesting proposal. It's first of its kind. It's a novel approach, very controversial, right? Because now we're already seeing lawsuits against this, correct?
That's right. Not even a full 24 hours after the final votes were tallied, a gun rights group has already filed suit. So the National Association for Gun Rights immediately filed suit in federal court, essentially saying that the imposition of the tax amounts to a tax on a constitutional right. A direct quote from the lawsuit here says, San Jose's imposition of a tax fee or other arbitrary cost on gun ownership is intended to suppress gun ownership without furthering any government interest. And it points out the fact that, as proposed, non-payment of the insurance or failure to show that you've paid the fee, under the ordinance, they want to make that grounds for at least temporary confiscation of a firearm, which they include in the complaint in this lawsuit.
Yeah. So, and then obviously you spoke to a number of other gun rights groups like the Second Amendment Foundation and Firearms Policy Coalition. And there's some disagreement over strategy here or timing, because they want to file suits as well, but they're waiting, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I talked to Alan Gottlieb at the Second Amendment Foundation, and he told me that SAF and Firearms Policy Coalition are going to jointly file a lawsuit, but they're waiting until, because as we said before, this isn't good law yet. So there's a legal standard called ripeness, where basically there has to be some sort of controversy. It has to be the right timing in order to better prepare them for the case. So they will be filing suit, just not as of yet. And I'm sure the other gun groups.
The NRA will probably get in on it, or the their California branch, the California Rifle and Pistol Association, will probably be involved in lawsuits as well, I'd expect, especially because this ordinance really kind of strikes at the heart of Heller. There's a lot of speculation over what the Second Amendment specifically covers in terms of what protections it offers for different activities with firearms, because the Supreme Court simply hasn't done much on this issue since the beginning since the founding of the country. And so they're still deciding whether or not may issue gun carry permits are an infringement on the Second Amendment. That's exactly what they're deciding right now at the court this year. But there's a lot of things that they don't know for sure. Interestingly, though, literally the one thing we do know from the Supreme Court is that the right to own a gun for self-defense inside of your own home, a gun in common use, is protected by the Second Amendment. That's like the literal core.
That's correct.
Of Heller. And so this goes right to that core, because they're trying to put a tax and a insurance requirement on that specific concept of being able to even own a gun. Not, it's not a tax on your purchase of a gun. It's not, a tax on your purchase of training for the gun. It's literally a tax on just your ownership of that gun. It's a property tax, and the insurance requirement is a similar idea of like you can't have the gun otherwise.
And they're literally using homeowners insurance as the grounds to get these guns covered under a liability policy. To your point as well, they make an exemption for law enforcement and for people that have waivers for low income. But another one of the exemptions is for folks with a concealed carry permit, which we know Santa Clara County, where San Jose is, makes it very difficult to get a permit. And the people that they do grant, the people that do get a permit, it turns out, are in sort of a pay-to-play scheme because their former sheriff is now being indicted for corruption charges. So it's kind of, like you said, it strikes directly at the heart of home ownership because no one else can carry outside the home with their guns. So it doesn't cover that.
So this will likely go one of two ways in my personal view. And that's either the ordinance will get struck down basically immediately and the city council won't bother to try and follow up. You saw this actually in California recently with ordinances in LA and San Francisco, where they tried to ban NRA members from doing work with the city, right? They tried to say, if you're a member of the NRA, you can't get city contracts, which it's not explicitly a Second Amendment issue like this one is, but it's obviously more of a First Amendment issue. But that got basically cut off at the knees right away. And then the cities gave up on the idea altogether and didn't try to appeal and push this through any further than that as sort of a symbolic thing. This might end up the same way. That's kind of where I'm leaning right now, just on my personal view of this, is my personal analysis of what's likely to happen with this law. But the other direction, what could happen is if San Jose keeps trying to defend this law or this ordinance, you could absolutely see this end up at the Supreme Court, because the thing about the Ninth, first of all, San Jose is in the Ninth Circuit. It's in California. And the Ninth Circuit is really not keen to strike down any gun regulations at all, ever, pretty much. So at least not at the full panel. Sometimes you'll get a 3-judge panel that does it, but the full panel, as actually one of the members of the Ninth Circuit was just making this point through mockery of his fellow judges, which we talked about recently. But the Ninth Circuit could uphold something like this. I could see that happening, and then at that point, this is absolutely something that I could see the Supreme Court wanting to weigh in on, especially because in the Roberts era, they like to take sort of novel outliers, right? And this is the most novel outlier in the country right now as far as gun law is concerned. So I wouldn't be surprised, especially because it'd be so easy for them, because it's just like basically right in the wheelhouse of what they've already decided, and how they don't really even have to expand much beyond that. So those are the two paths I could see it taking. I think the first is more likely. I think this is just kind of a stunt. The mayor's term is up soon and he can't be mayor anymore. This gives him attention, and maybe he's looking to further his career elsewhere by being at the center of a news story like this. I don't know. Well, obviously he says that's not the reason, but I'd be surprised if this makes it beyond the first ruling in federal court. But we'll see. We'll keep following it. I mean, we followed it since the first inklings of it, so we're going to stay on the story. And that's all we got for this week. If you would like to help support our sober, serious firearms reporting and analysis, you can do that by heading over to thereload.com and buying a membership today. We have monthly memberships starting at $10 a month, and yearly memberships at $100 a month, which is a nice discount there. And you can even buy a lifetime membership if you really want to help support what we're doing. We had a couple lifetime membership sales this month, and it's really helped to push us through financially to next month, which is always our goal. We want to survive and expand if possible. It's a lot more we could be doing. So if you want to help give us that extra financial support, that's the best way to do so. You'll get access to dozens of original exclusive pieces of analysis and news stories that you can't get literally anywhere else. And you'll also get access to this podcast a day early and the opportunity to join us in a members segment here, should you wish to. If you're a member who wants to be on the show, please reply to your Sunday newsletter, your members newsletter that you get, this exclusive newsletter for members on Sunday. Reply to that. Let us know you want to be on, and we'd love to interview you. We've had a number of members on in the past, some very interesting people, very eclectic group, very diverse. It's wonderful. So let's have some more of you guys. I'd love to hear from more of you. But until next week, that's it. That's all we've got. See ya.